I didn't have a lot of hope for the future. And like, I didn't even finish school. I dropped out in 10th grade, basically. I spent like a year just like living in my car, pay this guy I knew so I could sleep on his floor.
That day I knew that for better or for worse, this chapter of my life ends here.
I learned to code at age 31. I've just been studying these languages for 30 minutes every night before I go to bed for 20 years. The teachers you're going to find on YouTube, they're probably at least as good, if not way better, at actually teaching than tenured university professors. A developer is not paid to write code. A developer is paid to...
Quincy, thank you so much for taking out the time. Before we start talking, I want to tell all the viewers that we've been just vibing, having food, talking about different topics before the podcast started. So we've had a great chat, but now we want to talk about things that people are interested about, who watch my videos, people who are in college, starting their career and want to learn about coding in general. So that is the theme of this podcast. I want to first start out by telling you the behind story of me and freeCodeCamp.
Absolutely.
I started learning Python on the day my JEE exam ended, right? The JEE exam is this huge entrance exam in engineering colleges in India. And so if you pass through it, you get into the IITs, which is the most prestigious.
Oh yeah, of course. World famous.
Yep, exactly. And if you don't, then you end up in the lesser known colleges and it's not seen as a good thing. But I gave the JEE exam. I failed miserably in that. And I just had this idea. You have this intuition when you give an exam, right? If you've made it or not. And so I just knew that this exam, I have just flunked because at the last moment, I just was speechless. I just couldn't execute and I got anxious at the last moment. I've worked on it in the last few years, but that day I knew that for better or for worse, this chapter of my life ends here, right? All the mathematical concepts, all chemistry, or all physics, that is it. It ends here. And now the next chapter of my life begins. And that is why I went back home and I started learning Python. And I did that with a video on freeCodeCamp. And that is 27th of May, 2019.
Wow.
So it's more than 4 or 5 years now.
Yeah.
And today I'm having you, the founder of freeCodeCamp, sitting in front of me. And this is I'm grateful to have you here.
Well, it's an honor. And I'm thrilled that, freeCodeCamp could be kind of like a motivational and informational lifeline at that moment. Like in the US, we don't really have an equivalent to that exam. I know in China, they've got like the Gaokao, which is a similar extreme high pressure. Like, are you going to be a doctor or are you going to be like a farmer type like exam? Like it bifurcates features, right? And I think it sucks. Like that's how it has worked for so long. And I will tell you that like I dropped out of high school. I didn't even take like university entrance exams because I didn't think I was going to go to university.
And you were in China back then?
Well, this was back when I was in the US. I grew up in Oklahoma City, which is not like a famous city that a lot of people would know. If you follow basketball, you might know the OKC Thunder, the NBA team. But generally, I didn't have a lot of hope for the future. And as a result, I didn't study, like I didn't even finish school. I dropped out in 10th grade, basically, and just worked menial jobs, did construction, worked at grocery stores, like 6 a.m., clean the grocery store, open up, like serve customers and stuff. And I thought that was what the rest of my life was going to be like. And it wasn't until several years later when I eventually went to school, to university, which you can do in the US, thankfully. The US, you can drop out of high school and you can go do menial jobs for years, and then you can go back and get a university degree. And that's one of the cool things about the US is we really do believe in like second chances, third chances, nth chances. Uh-huh. And so there's this flexibility where it's like, okay, no big deal. Like there are lots of university students in the United States who are in their 30s, 40s. I meet people sometimes in their 50s and 60s who are finishing the degree. And now they may not need to finish their degree because they've already got a lot of work experience and stuff. But for them, it's a personal goal. It's rarer for me to meet people from India or from China or from other countries outside the US that take that kind of like non-traditional route into higher education. So it was very important to me. Once I worked for about a decade as a teacher, as a school director, and then eventually I learned to code and I worked as a software engineer. I'll be happy to talk about that. But the most important thing to me was we need to create additional structure outside of what the governments are doing, outside of what companies are offering, different pathways that people can use to obtain the skills that they need so that they can go and do whatever they want. Because it's ridiculous that an exam you take when you're 18 years old has such a outsized impact on what you do with the rest of your life. So pardon me for like sermonizing, but I just think it's sad that it's still like that in this age of, abundance that we live in, where like information is free, where I can get like any song, any movie, anything like on demand on my phone within a few seconds, where I can get any piece of information I want, where I can read about any historical figure or any, soccer player in seconds on Wikipedia, right? For free. It just doesn't make sense to me that there are these high stakes entrance exams for universities, and that universities have so much power in separating the classes. Mm-hmm. And that's true in the United States. And that's, true everywhere, I think, because education, for lack of, I don't know how else to put it, but it's like basically a way of classes perpetuating themselves. Like, yes, I went to an inexpensive state university that anybody who applies to can get into it, right? They're not selective at all. I bet you they have a near 100% admission rate. And nobody's heard of that university. And if I talk to somebody who went to Stanford, or I talk to somebody from MIT, they're not going to know what that is. And they're probably going to think, well, he wasn't smart enough to get into Harvard or Stanford or whatever. Maybe they won't think that. But like, I can't help but like encounter people throughout my life who probably have those biases. And I think with time and with work, a lot of that is going to be collapsed. And it's just going to be, okay, what can you do? What do you actually know how to do? What have you done? That's, I think, what's real important. Yeah. So I know that you didn't even ask me a question. You just told me about your journey to freeCodeCamp and learning Python. Yeah. And of course, 5 years later, here you are.
Isn't that the most viewed freeCodeCamp video? Or is it the C++ one?
I mean, there are a lot that have been, like there's Python for Everyone, Dr. Chuck from University of Michigan. Mike Dane has excellent teacher who taught, I think, Python, C++, Ruby, like a lot of different topics. And then I think we have, Bo Carnes may have taught a Python course. We've got a lot of courses.
A lot of Python courses.
Yeah. I mean, freeCodeCamp, if you're familiar with the YouTube channel, you may notice that we publish these comprehensive courses on different topics several times a week. So we've got like probably at least 50 intro to Python, intro to JavaScript, intro to web development type courses. And everybody learns from a different one differently. And like, it doesn't hurt to do multiples.
Yeah. No, this is really incredible. I think for India, I can say that there's a lot of judgment when you take a path which is less traveled. And so I think one of the best things that freeCodeCamp has done is to democratize that idea that you can be okay not doing what everyone tells you to do, and you can take another path of learning to code and then open up opportunities through that. So that, I think, is the biggest benefit of having freeCodeCamp in the world that we live in today. I think freeCodeCamp is the biggest tutorial place for people to learn to code. Would you put it that way?
I don't know. 1 million people use freeCodeCamp every day. I'll say that.
1 million people.
Yeah.
That's insane. You have, in your experience of the last 10 years, observed thousands of developers, if not lakhs and millions. You would have observed a lot of habits and things that helped certain developers level up a lot faster and others stuck in the beginner mode, right? So with that experience, I just wanted to understand, first of all, what type of mistakes have you seen people make when they first begin their journey of coding? Like when they're just learning about functions and loops and classes and objects and the basic stuff. And secondly, what are those habits and things that some other developer did which helped him or her get more opportunities, maybe jobs or freelancing and other things, helped him level up a lot faster?
Yeah. Well, I think, the most important thing that people don't do what separates successful people from less successful people is they fall off the horse and they get back on the horse, I definitely struggled. When I first learned to code, I would go to...
What was your first language?
Python. And I would go to Project Euler, which is an excellent kind of like coding challenge, mathematical challenge. And I would just solve those with Python.
Fibonacci series and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. And that is excellent practice. And I encourage you to go as far into those as you can go. I went into like the 30s or the 40s and it was getting really mathematical and hard. and I went to do some other projects. But the time that I spent doing those was absolutely super, super useful. So like mastering the fundamentals so that you don't have to constantly come back and you don't feel like there are huge gaps in your knowledge. So I do think taking time to just do a bunch of algorithm challenges, that's one of the reasons why freeCodeCamp's curriculum is designed to really, rehash the fundamentals over and over. And why we don't focus on throwing the kitchen sink and everything at you at once, but rather like we really do focus slowly and deliberately. We're going to spend a whole lot of time with HTML.
There's a concept and then there's a way for you to practice it and then you move ahead.
Yeah. And like that theory, practice. And the freeCodeCamp curriculum is going to come to resemble this even more, where we have even more theory on top of that practice. Like right now, there's a heavy bias toward practice because we want you to be typing. We want your fingers on the keyboard, getting tests to pass the whole time. But a common feedback we have is like, we've got like all this theoretical lecture stuff on YouTube, but people don't know how to find it. So we're going to put some more theory stuff right in the curriculum. And that's how it used to be. And we moved to like full practice, but now we're kind of swinging back to it.
What's a good healthy split between theory practice?
I mean, like I would say
when you're starting out,
here's what I would do if I were starting out. So I would recommend just starting at the top of the freeCodeCamp curriculum and working your way down and doing that for the practical component. For the theory, I'd recommend like watching Harvard CS50, reading some books.
What is Harvard CS50 for people who are watching?
Sure. Harvard CS50 is the most popular course at Harvard, which is, the most famous university and one of the oldest American university, 400 years old, right? And
David Mellon is an excellent teacher.
He's an excellent teacher, and I had the honor of interviewing him on the freeCodeCamp podcast a few years ago. And so I really look up to the guy. He is incredible at teaching concepts, and he'll teach you C. He'll teach you like the basics of how like
his energy is just amazing. Like it flows into me, and I'm like, I am really excited to learn any topic out there.
Yeah, and I aspire to be as good a teacher as him one day. And so I'm constantly trying to like.
But what exactly does a CS50 curriculum have?
So it teaches C, it teaches databases. I think it teaches SQL. And then you eventually get into like Python. And there's some CS50 offshoots like at game development, kind of like side course and stuff like that. But the idea is it teaches you most of the fundamentals of like that you would need to know before you really dive into a computer science degree or before you really dive into just like a serious self-study session where you're going through tons of algorithm challenges, right? Like where you're trying to prepare for a job, like grinding leak code or cracking the coding interview or doing any of these things, right? And like, of course, freeCodeCamp has like free equivalents of all those things and stuff. But if you, so for the theory, I would do that. And then what I would do after that is I would just listen to tons of podcasts and watch YouTube channels like yours. Like it may not feel like you're learning a lot of stuff, but you learn a tremendous amount of stuff almost through osmosis just by listening to people talk. Like I'll tell you about my information diet. And this has been how it's been for like the last 10 years. So I listen to tons of podcasts. I listen to probably 3 hours of podcast, 4 hours of podcast a day.
Acquired when they were
at double speed. Yeah. So it's technically I'm only spending like 2 hours a day listening to podcasts. It's like when I'm walking, I walk for like more than an hour a day. When I walk over to the gym, I work out, like walk back home. The whole time I'm like listening to podcasts, and I'm listening to a lot of programming related podcasts.
Yeah.
Which, I've interviewed the hosts of a lot of these podcasts, like the Changelog is really good for open source. So I listen to those, and that's how I stay up on like tech news. That's how, like, just following the news, actually, you learn quite a bit about software. Like you'll hear about like CrowdStrike. Okay. What happened with CrowdStrike? Like, okay, now I'm learning a little bit about kernel access and how like this, threat detection works and all this stuff. And like, so just by following the news items, or you learn about Heartbleed, that happened a while back. Like if you follow security news, security is a great way to really improve your understanding like systems design. So just listening to like I listen to Risky Business is a pretty good podcast. I think out of like New Zealand or Australia. I think it's Australia. Risky Business. Yeah. Like the Tom Cruise movie from the 80s. They just talk about like cybersecurity stuff, and then watching lots of cybersecurity focused content on YouTube, watching lots of courses on, like I watch a lot of freeCodeCamp courses. Like there's a really good system design course that we published recently that I watched the whole thing through while I was eating dinner. It was only like an hour and a half long or something, but like I learned a lot from that. Yeah. So, I mean, I think theory, you don't necessarily have to like deliberately set out to learn theory. It doesn't hurt to take CS50 or to take a comparable course, but you're going to learn a lot just through constant exposure, like what they call extensive reading of the subject. And reading, I say reading, but like you can absolutely just go read books, you can watch videos, you can listen to podcasts. It doesn't really matter. Like however you want to do it, you're still taking in a whole lot of language, a whole lot of thoughts, people talking about.
But it's one thing to just go through the content, like just hearing it out and all. It's another to actually dial in the concepts that are important, to write logic, to write all the pseudocode or the actual code itself. So I feel like, what do you think, according to you, should be the way for people to actually learn to code? Like even before they learn coding, what should be the mindset to approach programming, according to you? Like there's a whole thing about, unlearn before you learn. So what should the mindset be? I mean,
so there's like just general learning how to learn strategies. Like if you've ever heard of Barbara Oakley, she has this course called Learn How to Learn. Very popular course. My friend Dawal Shah, who runs Class Central, has spent a great deal of time talking to her over the years. And she's very good at teaching you how to learn. And so that would be a good use of your time to like go through that course first. Because I mean, if you think about what a developer is not paid to write code. A developer is paid to learn. And then they learn what needs to be done. They understand the specs, they understand the technology, they understand like the syntax of like the different APIs they're using and stuff like that. And then they sit down and they write the code, right? And they can write the code because they've spent all the time learning, right? People have this conception that the developer's just like it's like The Matrix or like some of those absurd movies from the 90s with the Swordfish is a really good, ridiculous, over-the-top depiction of programming, right? But basically, people, but you need to learn how to learn, like, and turn yourself into a learning machine. And I don't think there's some like black magic there. I think it's just a matter of common sense. Like, did I sleep enough? Am I experiencing diminishing returns after coding for 6 hours? Maybe instead of coding 6 hours Thursday and being tired for the rest of the week, I should code 30 minutes or maybe an hour Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and take Sunday off, right? Like,
space it out.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's so much diminishing returns. Like, I spend a lot of time studying foreign languages. My wife's Chinese, and so I speak Cantonese and Mandarin, and I also speak Japanese, and I spend a lot of time doing that. And you just have to learn so much. You have to learn so many Chinese characters to use these languages and so much vocabulary and everything like that. So what I do is before I go to bed every night, I study for 30 minutes, and that's it. Like, I've just been studying these languages for 30 minutes every night before I go to bed for 20 years.
And do you think 30 minutes a day is enough for like coding, or like 1 hour, 30 minutes?
I think if you're not under the pressure of like, I got to get a job to pay for my rent or something like that, right? Like I think a realistic timetable to become a developer is 2 years. If you did 30 minutes to an hour a day for 2 years, you could be on par with like a CS grad, even if you're doing self-study.
But then why do these bachelor degrees of computer science are like 4 years long, at least in my country?
Well, a lot of it's general ed. There's like a lot of requirements, and there's a lot of inefficiency too. A professor standing in front of a class of like 200 people or whatever, it's not a very efficient way to communicate. Like video, books. I mean, books are like by far the most efficient way to learn, and they're hundreds of years old, right?
Yeah. The
printing press was invented like 1455 was when the first books rolled off the printing press. Like 600, almost 700 years ago. We've had books, right? No, I think it's almost 600 years ago. Sorry. If you think about it, like that is incredibly like there's so much information that can be conveyed through language. So much. I mean, you think of like how much poetry can contain, right? And how evocative it can be. Like human language is an incredibly dense, powerful tool. Some lecturer standing up there writing on the whiteboard. I mean, you're spending time to get to your class. You're sitting down. Everybody's getting their seats. Everybody's getting their laptops out of their notebooks, all that stuff. And like you're starting the class. And I mean, how much content is actually there? And then you're finishing the class. You're walking across campus to some other place. Yeah. It's like if you like when I learn, here's how I learn. I just read. I pull up the text directly on my laptop, huge font, and I just read through it.
Huge font.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't have any music going on, nothing in the background, or I just put on headphones. I put on a podcast and I go out and I walk. and I just take in the information, or I watch a YouTube video. When I watch a YouTube video, I'm not doing anything else. I'm literally just staring at my phone, usually in a bath or something. I like to sit in the bath and watch like these video essays or watch courses while I'm just chilling there. And like thinking about focusing on what I would have said. I think there's so much noise around like the university experience. And I'm not saying that stuff is bad. I think it's important to socialize and all that stuff. But if you just want to learn, there's a guy who went through the entire MIT OpenCourseWare in 1 year.
Oh, wow.
He did the entire thing. And he wrote a book about it. It was a challenge. He said, I'm going to go through every single MIT OpenCourseWare course.
Every course.
And I'm going to do the entire curriculum as though I were getting a computer science degree from MIT. Wow. He did all of them. He did the non-computer science ones too. He did the general ed, and he got everything done in a year. He passed all the exams. So if he'd really gone to MIT, he would have been able to get a degree from MIT. But of course he didn't. So he doesn't actually have the degree, but he completed the whole courseware. He understood all the content that was contained in the text. Granted, there's lots of assignments and things that might be, distinct to the class that the professor would assign and stuff like that. So it's not included in that, but the core content, he was able to absorb that within a year. So I do think that if you have a system, if you have a plan, if you're dedicated and you're persistent and you stick to your regiment, you can learn an incredible amount of things.
One thing that you mentioned was English as a secondary subject. I feel that you are great at communicating. If people have been watching, they would just observe that. And this is a skill which a lot of developers lack. They can maybe just code up something, especially the Indian developers that I have met and talked with, but they're not so great at communicating, at articulating what they've just done. And that keeps them from unlocking more opportunities and from being able to be a team collaborator, right? So what, according to you, would be some tips that you can give to developers to communicate better?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, Indians are native English speakers, basically, like a lot of them. I know that there are people that didn't go to university and don't necessarily have good command of English in India, but I think a lot of people may take for granted that their English, they may just be like, oh, I can speak English. Why would I take English courses or something like that, right? Yeah. I will tell you, I'm a native English speaker. I attended university in English. I attended graduate school in English. I have used English all day long, every day for like 43 years of my life, right? I'm 43. So I still learn new usage expressions, new kind of speech pattern, new memes, all that stuff, several a day. Like I'm constantly looking things up in the dictionary and trying to improve my English. So what I would say, the most important thing is do not presume that just because your English is good enough to get by, that it can't be improved upon. It absolutely can be improved upon. Be curious, read a lot, listen to a lot of podcasts, listen to podcasts from different parts of the world. I listen to like podcasts from India. I listen to podcasts from Nigeria. Like, of course they're in English, but like they're using different expressions and expressions in different ways. Like British English is very different from American English. Like we have these crazy expressions like Bob's your uncle.
Well, what up?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's like different pronunciation, but like actual usage patterns are different too. And it is important. Like, I'm sorry, but you can't consider yourself like a true, like fully, full spectrum English speaker if you can't like attend like some old Indian university professor's like lecture and understand everything he says. Sure. Like Indian English is just a different variation of English, just like American English is a different variation of British English. People need to, get used to understanding all these different accents and stuff like that. So I would say like the first thing is accepting that learning English is going to be a lifelong pursuit, and don't rest on your laurels and don't ever think your English is good enough, right? I've just come to terms with the fact that I'm going to be learning new stuff. Like I watch a TV show, like you watch some HBO show or something, and they've got like really good writers, and they definitely like to use different expressions and words that you're unfamiliar with.
Game of Thrones.
Yeah, exactly. Lots of different like kind of like high English, like weird medieval English, or you read like J.R. Tolkien and stuff like that. Lots of terms, some made up, but some that are just like real English that have existed for hundreds of years. Different usage patterns. So I would encourage people to just continue to actively develop their English. I would consider like I'd encourage them to write a lot, write down their thoughts, communicate as much as possible. And just the main thing though you can do to really improve your English is just listen to a lot of English, read a lot of English.
Yeah.
And that's like the cornerstone of my language learning as a nascent Chinese speaker is I just read a whole lot in Chinese. I listen to a whole lot of Chinese audio. I have a lot of Chinese conversations, and just there's this saying, quantity has a quality all its own. Like if you take in enough, you just kind of like your brain somehow makes sense of it. And you start to like every day, like I do with these podcast interviews where I'm talking to somebody, and normally I'm not talking for, an hour straight like I am right now. I'm listening and I'm asking questions. So it's cool to be on the other end. You're a great interviewer. So, but it's always really interesting. Like I find myself using like expressions I've never used before. Like, wow, it's weird. Like I've heard that so many times on like The Simpsons or whatever, and I've never actually said that myself, right? And I just use this silly, colorful expression, right? And it's so fun. Like language is playful. And I would say, like, I was an English teacher for like 10 years before I started learning to code and doing all this stuff, and I helped other people learn English. And so my advice is just have humility and just keep your proverbial nose to the grindstone, right? Mm-hmm. Keep your shoulder to the wheel. Just keep, see, there's some weird expressions. I don't know if I've ever said shoulder to the wheel before, but like keep doing that stuff and have fun with it.
Right. A couple of more questions before we end this, and that is, number one, how can people who are learning to code effectively learn to code using generative AI? So what Excellent is the question. Best way to use generative AI to learn to code according to you?
Yeah, so I use it all the time. I use GPT 4.0 because we pay for the premium.
$20 a month.
$20 a month, well spent. I use it every single day, several times a day. And what I do is like I was doing some like FFmpeg, bash scripting over the weekend. And so I'll go in there, I'll be like, hey, I need to write a script that does this. Like, can you give me like something to start with? And then I'm like, okay, can you tell me what this code is doing? What is this argument here? What does this mean? And it's just kind of like interactive documentation almost. Because I could go and I could read the FFmpeg spec and it would be huge. But I kind of use GPT as like a guide. Like you're giving me a very quick tour of this aspect of FFmpeg, like working with like OBS and stuff like that, right? Yeah. And so I'm exporting, okay, why should I use this, audio codec instead of this one? What bit rate should I use? Like, is there diminishing returns to using beyond like a certain thing that humans can't detect the quality difference, but I'm creating a whole bunch of extra data that has to be stored somewhere, right? Like those kinds of questions. I ask those kinds of trade-offs, and then I gradually kind of like massage a script, and I'm like, okay, and then I'll go and I'll run it, and I'll be like, this isn't doing exactly what, and I think it might be because this command is like, non-conventional. Where did you come up with this command? And it's like, oh, I'm sorry. Like I just thought that would work because it works over here in this section. And so it's like a conversation. So I really find it helpful to approach GPT as though it's like a colleague, and like you're the boss, right? Or you're like the senior, you're the product manager, and they're the junior developer or something like that, right?
From the suits.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you just ask questions. And the important thing is don't just stop at saying, okay, the script works. Cool. Like I want to make sure I understand exactly what I'm running, and I'll say, cool, thank you. And I will thank it because it's like, it kind of is fun to role play as though it's a real human being.
You've done that?
And then
thank you.
Yeah, or great job. And then I'll go and I'll like look up I'll like double check the work and make sure I understand all the different components. But it did speed me up, because if I was just like grasping at straw, like it gives me my kind of first draft. And then I go and I iterate on that. And I find that is really helpful, because the biggest problem as a developer and as a writer is often like the blank page problem, right? It's so much harder to start with nothing than it is. Like with freeCodeCamp, whenever we give you a project, we always give you like a test suite. So like, oh, interesting. So these are what the variable names are going to be. And like, this is the expected output from this function and stuff like that. Okay. So I have an idea of what I need to name the functions if I want to get these tests to pass. And it's like, it's almost, working from the test backward to getting functional code. And I feel that, LLMs are good for doing that sort of work.
Makes sense. One more question I had with generative AI was, what type of developer jobs do you think will get replaced or will get done faster with the help of generative AI? So that people know that, okay, this is what they should not be running after, if there are any jobs like that.
Well, over the past 40, 50 years since software development emerged as a field, you just gradually had kind of this like, you can think of it like as a rising sea level of what constitutes employable developer skills, right? Like when I was a teenager, like I could create a very simple website with like HTML and CSS and like NeoCities or GeoCities or something like that, AngelFire, right? And maybe people could write very simple like Java applets and things like that. And they could create a simple app like that. And maybe that was enough to get them hired because everybody and their dog wanted somebody to come in and build a website for their...
Comparable.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But gradually, like those skills don't cut the proverbial mustard anymore. And you need to gradually like ratchet up your abilities, right? To now, in order to be able to get employed, like it's not enough to merely know WordPress. You need to understand like how to deploy it and, what hosting options, how to like get SSL, like which modules to use and stuff like that. And many people would argue like even like that WordPress developer type skill set is not enough when you could go out and find somebody that knows, Node.js and knows React and can use like Next.js and like a bunch of frameworks to build like something that is fast, accessible, secure, like all these other things, and a lot cheaper to host, right? And then, so there is going to be this ratcheting effect where you need to know more and more, but that's always been the case. So I think LLMs are going to be helpful in just helping you get to that level faster. So I think, and also when you're working in the field, like I understand a lot. I'm not the greatest coder in the world. I don't code a lot. I mostly run a charity and, conduct podcast interviews and do a lot of reading and try to run the organization well. So I think that there's always been this ratcheting effect where you need to know more and more and it's getting more and more competitive. But if you think about it, there's so much work to be done. I think that people are moving stuff to the software layer faster than stuff is getting automated away. The tools are going to continue to get more powerful, but the specifications and requirements are going to continue to get better too, or like higher, right? Humans have this insatiable desire for faster, cheaper, better, right? And so we're going to constantly be trying to like, nobody cared about responsive design for a long time. It was just like, you just accepted that when you opened a web page on your iPhone, it's going to look like crap. But eventually people are like, wait a second, maybe we can do something about this, right? Like there will be new problems to be solved. So I'm optimistic, like at least, certainly over the rest of my lifetime, like 60, 70 years, that there's going to be new stuff to be done. I don't think that the market for developers is going to contract due to generative AI. I think that it will just, accelerate this ratcheting effect and you'll need to get smarter and smarter and work harder and harder, learn more and more. And frankly, I think that's a good thing. Like if you look, maybe developers have been able to get by with like cursory knowledge and not, being more complacent in their skills. Well, that acceleration is going to be there. But the great news is the tooling is going to continue to improve. And the learning resources, we're doing our darndest to try to continually improve them as well.
Take me back to the time when you started your own journey of learning to code. So how did Quincy learn to code? You want to take me to that time?
I'll just give you a very quick life story. And I hope this is interesting and relevant. So I grew up in Oklahoma City. I dropped out of high school. I spent like a year just like living in my car as a 17-year-old. Like
just living in your car, like sleeping in your car.
Yeah, just sleeping in my car. Eventually, like I got a job that paid enough to like pay this guy I knew so I could sleep on his floor. And I just, you just grab like a blanket and a pillow, you sleep on somebody's floor and you pay him $100 a month and he lets you sleep on his floor. So that was kind of like my first step. And then eventually I got enough money to get my own apartment. And then eventually I went back to university. Again, in the US, we have so many inexpensive universities that you can attend that are like community college type schools. And they're pretty good. They're actually not that different from going to like a fancy pants Ivy League school that people try so hard to get into. They don't have the prestige, but the professors are usually quite knowledgeable and interested in teaching. And so, I went to like a school that people haven't heard of in the middle of Oklahoma. And I worked really hard. I got a degree in journalism and English. And then I went to China and I taught English in China and I got a graduate degree in China. I met my wife in China. She was in grad school with me. Mm-hmm. And then eventually we were able to move back to the United States. She was able to get a green card and she worked as an accountant and I worked as a school director. And we did the double income, no kids thing for a while. Dink. Yes. We did that for like 10 years.
10 years?
Yeah.
You just had this thing that I won't have kids?
Well, I mean, I plan to eventually have kids, but in the US, like if you're smart, you plan and you don't just start having kids right away.
Kids are expensive.
Right.
I mean, anybody can have a kid. technically, right? But who's going to support that kid? Who's going to ensure that that kid has, food and toys and like, gets proper medical care and all those things? The government in the US, unfortunately, is not going to do as much as it should do to ensure that's the case. So we just did that. And I worked as a school director. So I'm working as a school director and running the school. And it's an unhappy school, frankly, because the teachers are having to do a whole bunch of paperwork, immigration paperwork, grade reports, stuff like that. And the students are unhappy because they want to be hanging out with their cool teachers and practicing their conversational English and going on field trips and doing all that kind of fun stuff. But their teachers are busy doing like, government regulation stuff because they're dealing with a lot of international students. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with the rest of my staff. Everybody was busy doing a bunch of busy work. And I was like, man, there has to be some way to like automate some of this. So I just started Googling and I just like learned really basic, Python scripting. And I use this tool called like AutoHotkey to like click through all these government websites. I don't know if you've heard of AutoHotkey. Yeah. You just like, you basically write a script that like figures out what pixel to click on. And then you run the script and you walk away from your computer and it does the work for you while you go hang out with your students.
We used to do that when I was in my hostel. So me and my roommate would do that. You'd go to get a dinner from the mess. We'd come back and we'd get what we wanted, the scraping and all.
Yeah, it's a great tool for scraping stuff, right? I didn't even know what scraping was. I was just Googling random things, coming up with the most hacky, janky code ever, but it was getting things done. And the teachers were happy. The school, like my boss was happy. Like I won this award for like running the school that had the most growth out of like 50 different schools across the United States. And it all came down to me just automating the boring stuff. So we could like the stuff that doesn't involve like a human teacher who has skill and empathy and all these different, capabilities. And like basically business process automation, I guess is what you would call it. But yeah, like that, I saw how much of an impact just doing like some guy that doesn't even know how to code, like Googling stuff and putting stuff together and being fearless about it. And it was just that kind of like Forrest Gump, like happy-go-lucky. What could go wrong? Why not try this stuff? I was too naive to not try it,
Yeah.
So I did it. And then I was like, wow, if some guy who doesn't even know what he's doing can have this much impact, I should just like actually try to learn how to code. So I spent like 9 months hanging out at libraries, going to hacker spaces, and I did like tons of hackathons. I think like 40 or 50 hackathons in 1 year.
Oh, wow.
It's like every single weekend I did a hackathon. I would take the buses up and down California.
What was the motive for you?
I just wanted to get good at coding. And I didn't know this, but winning hackathons is a great way to get a job because you've proven like not only can I just drop, parachute into this, build a team and build a product and then go up and pitch it to a bunch of judges who are usually like startup founders and stuff and win, like me versus a whole bunch of Stanford kids and a whole bunch of other, people that have real skills, right? Like if you can do that, then you can convince an employer like, hey, I know what I'm doing. Here are my hackathon wins. So I didn't know it, but I was building my skills. I was building my network from going to all these events and I was building my reputation at the same time. And so that's like a core thing that I tell people, like you have to build all three legs of the stool. The stool can't stand with just skills and network. You also have to have your reputation. You also have to have network because it is who you know if you want to be able to get jobs. Certainly at the beginning. At some point, your reputation can precede you to the point that people are just throwing job offers at you, right? I'm sure like if John Carmack wants to get a job as a software engineer, people will reach out to him, he probably has standing offers from like lots of different companies and stuff because he's got a reputation, right? And if you have a great network, but at the end of the day, you still need to have the skills. You need to perform. That's basically my learn to code story. And then I got a job as a software engineer. I worked as a software engineer for like a couple of years, did some freelance work, worked on a startup team of like maybe like 20 devs. And then I started thinking, man, I should teach other people how to do this. And so I started building educational projects and built this project that you've never heard of because it failed spectacularly. What I figured out after building all that by myself was nobody wants to spend hundreds of hours reading a bunch of books, watching a bunch of video courses, doing a bunch of MOOCs based on the recommendation that your software pooped out in like 20 seconds, right? They're like, oh, 20 seconds. Like, wow, that's very novel, but I'm sorry. I'm not doing that. It's like that meme, like I'm happy that happened or I'm sad for you, but I don't have time to read all that. Basically, that was kind of like the response people would give me.
Right.
And I was just really deflated after building that. So I built a few other projects and then eventually I just started stripping things down. Like, okay, like, why don't we just take away all these different subjects and assume that people just want to work as a software engineer? Because that's like by far the most represented, like web developer. That's like half of all developer jobs involve like web somehow, right? Even if you're building a mobile app, it's like kind of like a mobile UI, like a web backend, right? So why don't I just strip everything down and just teach JavaScript, because that's the key skill that everybody needs to work as a web developer. And then I just created this really simple curriculum. It was basically like a list of courses. So like Stanford's JavaScript course, there were some like HTML and CSS courses. And so it was basically just a curation of existing courses. And then posted that on Hacker News. Or I didn't even post that. I wrote some articles about development and stuff. And one of those blew up on Hacker News. And suddenly we had like tens of thousands of people interested. And then the GitHub repository started getting a bunch of stars. And then it just started to build up critical mass.
What was the repo about?
Well, it was the freeCodeCamp.
freeCodeCamp.
Yeah, so freeCodeCamp. Sorry, I didn't mention that, but freeCodeCamp was me stripping out all the complexity from my previous projects and just keeping it super simple.
Right.
Learn to code for free. Very simple value proposition.
I've made like at least 2 to 3 long form videos about freeCodeCamp and at least 4 to 5 reels about freeCodeCamp, and they've all worked out the best. And people just. I'm amazed by how, even if today I'll make it, there will be people who'll be like, oh my God, I did not know about that. And that's just insane. How much depth is there in the market, even after you about to turn like 10 years of running freeCodeCamp.
Yeah, we're going to be 10 in October.
Yeah, pretty crazy. So that's how you started freeCodeCamp, right? But tell me some of the craziest stories that you have come across of people who've gone through the curriculum, who've learned web development, who've applied all the learnings into building projects with the help of freeCodeCamp's tutorials and have gotten like a job or like freelance company or whatnot.
I mean, if you just go to like our LinkedIn alumni network, this is kind of fun. There's like 1.5 million people that like follow freeCodeCamp on LinkedIn of all places. I don't even use LinkedIn that much, but I think it's really cool that like so many people are following. And we publish all of our our latest articles and courses. We'll create articles and we'll share those on LinkedIn. So if you follow LinkedIn or freeCodeCamp, or you may already be following it if you're watching this, but just go there and check it out periodically because there's lots of resources. But you can go and you can look through the alumni. There are lots of alumni from freeCodeCamp that are at like, Emphasis and Wipro and of course like Microsoft and Google and like all the big FANG companies. And then there are even people that like work for like governments and stuff like that have earned a certification from freeCodeCamp. And I went through and like kind of like did a data analysis a few years ago. So you'll see 40,000 people when you go to the freeCodeCamp land page, more than 40,000 people. It could be like hundreds of thousands of people at this point, but I didn't want to go through and do the analysis. But what I did was I went through like all the LinkedIn alumni and I figured out who got their first software developer job after getting their freeCodeCamp certification. And that's how I determined, because there were lots of developers that probably, I'm already working at Microsoft.
Already had a job.
And I'll just do some continuing practical training and like, continuing education and I'll earn a freeCodeCamp cert. But like, I can say with confidence that at least 40,000 people have gotten jobs as software engineers after earning at least one freeCodeCamp cert.
And this is no pitch. There is no thing that we are selling here. If people are watching this and they're like, is it going to be a LinkedIn description with a 10% discount coupon? There's nothing like that.
Yeah, it's free. And it's open source.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it's because it's free and because it's open source that it has helped so many people. There are a lot of people who there are a lot of people who don't have credit cards, right? Like they're the unbanked, right? India has
teenagers.
Yeah, I mean, India has excellent payment infrastructure, but like Nigeria doesn't, and Bangladesh historically hasn't, and Kenya and Vietnam, a lot of places on Earth, even in the middle America, there are a lot of people that don't have, and when I say middle America, I'm not talking like, you hear about New York City, you hear about San Francisco. There's a huge amount of America in the middle that is not super duper wealthy.
Where we are right now, Central America.
Yeah, we're in Dallas, Texas, Dallas is one of the biggest cities in America, and it is home to like tons of Fortune 500 companies, a wealthy place. But if you drive north to like Oklahoma or to Kansas, Nebraska, Montana, like places like that, Wisconsin, they're not New York City. They're like small town people like hanging out, getting by, doing manufacturing, doing farming, things like that, right? And not all of them have credit cards. All of them even have high-speed internet. A lot of them are still using like dial-up and stuff like that. Some of them are able to use like Starlink and things like that. But yeah, like America is unequal too. And so a lot of people, like, if we were to charge $25 a month, that's what like a lot of these different course websites, that's totally fine. I think there's nothing wrong with charging $25 if you got great content. But it does put it out of reach for a lot of people. And like, if you're like a single parent and you've got kids, you need to feed them, they need to eat 3 times a day. You're not necessarily going to want to be spending $25 a month on a course website when you could be spending that money on, gassing up your car so you can get to work.
Yeah.
Or, paying for your bus pass, or getting peanut butter and pasta for your kids so they can survive, right?
That's a huge number, right? Like you just said $25 a month, and you said that every day 1 million people learn on freeCodeCamp. You do the math for people who are watching, and this is like a huge business that you could have had, but you chose to keep it free for everyone, for people to access.
I appreciate you saying that, but the reality is we wouldn't have 1 million people using it if it was $25 a month. Yeah. I mean, Netflix maybe has multiple millions of users, but they've got like Hollywood entertainment. Like, and entertainment is so much easier to sell than like, okay, like here's freeCodeCamp's pitch. Okay, come to freeCodeCamp. You're going to study like crazy. You're going to be up really late, cursing at your computer, being frustrated, trying to learn all these very abstract computer concepts.
And become the nerd you always wanted to be.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard work. I mean, we're basically like, the value proposition of freeCodeCamp is the same as like going to like, some sort of military boot camp where you're going to be like, you're going to get really in shape, but you're going to suffer and struggle like crazy to get there, right? Because that's what it is. Like, learning to code is not easy. Anybody who tells you that learning to code is easy, or that it somehow magically could be easy, they're trying to sell you something, because it's not easy.
Yeah.
There's going to be people that are like, hey, take my 30-day crash course in programming. It's only like $20 on, 90% off on Udemy or whatever. And like, I can totally understand why people buy those, because it feels good to buy a book, because it feels like you're buying the time to also read that book. And there's just something about buying something like, I've acquired this.
It's like you have investments in it. So now you have to like get some ROI out of it. So it keeps you in that. Well,
I mean, maybe, but I know lots of people who just buy books, and I've been guilty of this before, and never read it. But they're like, oh yeah, I got the book on French, but I can't speak French. One of these days I'll just pick that book up and I'll read it and I'll know French. So it's like, what's the difference between me not reading it and just reading it sometime in the future? But that's kind of like how we think, because consumerism, we're conditioned to like spend money to solve our problems, right? But you can't spend your way out of ignorance, right? If that were the case, there wouldn't be all these really rich, really dumb people everywhere.
Yeah.
Right? But there are. I've met so many people that are very, very wealthy that are not half as smart as the average poor person.
Why does it happen though? How are they rich without being...
they inherit the money, or they just get incredibly lucky. There's this old saying in America, like, if you're so smart, why aren't you rich? Like, people often commingle financial success with, like somebody who won the lottery. There's that
same
famous
thing is with happiness as well. Like, if you're so smart, why aren't you happy?
Yeah, and being smart actually may reduce your happiness, because like there's like advanced degrees are associated with mental illness, things like that, right?
Ignorance is bliss.
Yeah, and I don't believe that over a longer period of time that ignorance is bliss. I believe that catches up with you, and later in your life, you're like, man, like, why do I keep getting screwed by people? Why do I keep failing at these things that I try to set out? Why is this the nth time I've tried to quit doing this bad habit or something like that? Like, I do believe that the intelligent, like, well-balanced, like, prepared mind, that is the true path to happiness. Like, I feel happy every day, but I have to work really hard to get here. And I'm not going to say like I'm super duper smart or anything like that. I don't believe that I'm super duper smart. I believe that I'm smart enough and I'm hardworking enough. There's like a threshold beyond which there are diminishing returns. But if you can get to the point where you're disciplined enough to sit down and do a reasonable amount of work, you don't have to, burn the candle at both ends for like years and put yourself into an early grave to be able to be successful. I think that there's like a reasonable amount of effort in developing yourself and getting things done. And if you do that, then you'll probably be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Who are like the 3 top favorite teachers that you have observed who teach coding?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's some excellent teachers within the freeCodeCamp community. Like Bo Carnes has taught dozens of courses on software development. I think he's a really good teacher. Annie Akubo, she has her own channel and she's also a teacher at freeCodeCamp.
Development and all she did.
Yeah. And then, of course, Esvania, who teaches mostly in Spanish. She runs the Spanish YouTube channel. She's taught some English courses. She's phenomenal. So I just want to shout out those people as well. And Gavin Lawn is a great teacher who focuses mainly on C++ and C# in the Microsoft ecosystem. He's got a lot of courses on Blazor and stuff like that. I do think that one person I've learned a great deal from just watching their courses. We already talked about David Malin. I think that there's some kind of trying to think of there's this guy that a lot of people may not know, but he's quite good at teaching front end development. And he's on the freeCodeCamp podcast. Actually, I interviewed him earlier today. Jack Harrington. Super chill, 40 plus years of experience. And I would just say that there are so many teachers, Kylie Ying, Keith Galley in the machine learning space, Daniel Burke, these are just phenomenal teachers and they're just publishing videos on YouTube that anybody can watch. Mm-hmm. And maybe they're making a few $1,000s a month off of AdSense ads on YouTube. Maybe they're selling books and courses and stuff, but there's this huge kind of relatively unknown, and I say relatively unknown, only a few 100,000 subscriber type tier teachers out there. But if you just Google different or search on YouTube different topics programming Python course or JavaScript course, you're going to find those teachers. And what I would say is the teachers you're going to find on YouTube that can actually survive and do well on YouTube, they're probably at least as good, if not way better, at actually teaching and holding people's attention and imparting information than tenured university professors. Right. So no, don't ever feel I'm just getting the YouTube version. If I were to pay all that money to Harvard, I would get yes, David Malin's an exceptional talent. There are some exceptional professors as well, but you're not getting a diminished experience if you're learning from these people. These people are just as S tier as the other profs.
Mm-hmm. What do you think of the Indian people having that craze for big tech software developer jobs? There's this huge race to get into this. It has always become you first had the IIT race. Yeah. Now you have the software developer race into the FANG companies.
I totally understand that you want to get the high paying jobs. I want to be able to provide for my family. I want to be able to provide for my parents. I want to be able to provide for, a whole bunch of people in my community where I grew up. And one thing I see, India has this culture of having physicians, having engineers who send money back and support their family back in India. And I've always thought that was incredibly noble. And I can understand why, in the US, many of the best, CEOs, best doctors, they're Indians. Yep. And it's because they care about their community back home and they want to, get the most out of this opportunity that they've been given. And let's face it, India has a lot of challenges ahead of it in terms of infrastructure, in terms of public health, in terms of governance, all this stuff. And just having a whole lot of money and being able to store that and keep that in your family, it's like a huge insurance plan that I think a lot of Americans take for granted because we have really powerful institutions and high quality of life and, environment and all this stuff. But I think it's really admirable that they're so competitive. And one of the things that keeps me fired up every day working really hard is I know that there are people in Asia, in Latin America, in Africa that are hustling and getting things done and working very hard. And they're going to want it at least as bad as me. So I need to not take my eye off the ball. I need to keep scrambling. So
get back on it.
Yeah, it's a huge source of inspiration and it keeps me fired up. And whenever I'm feeling lazy, I'm I'm just going to eat some ice cream and chill. No, I'm going to get back to work.
Quincy, last question is, if you were in the shoes of Ishan Sharma, what's one question that you would ask Quincy Larson?
I'd probably ask him, I don't know. What's my 40-year plan?
What is it? And what is that?
My 40-year plan. I want to work at freeCodeCamp until I die. And I just want to make sure that everyone, everywhere in the world has access to free learning resources. I know I talked about this a lot during the interview, but the plan is like pretty well paved out. Like we're just going to continue to push the bounds of interactive learning. I do want it like in the future. I want it to be the Matrix. I want you to be like, I need to learn how to fly this helicopter, and like my eyes move really fast. And I just got that course beamed in. We will get there. I'm confident that the average human being will be, a Marvel superhero compared to like what they are now in a few generations. And I think learning has everything to do with that. Like we're going to unlock so much power. And if you were to teleport Ishan, or if you were to teleport me, or you were to teleport maybe the average Indian, the average American back in time, they would be so resourceful. They'd be so powerful. They would quickly become king of the world. And I think that we're going to create generations of people that are going to basically be like almost unrecognizable from the babbling fool that is sitting here talking to you right now. Like, I really do believe that there's so much potential out there.
Yeah.
And I believe that like every generation IQs go up. They have to adjust the test because kids are smarter and smarter than their parents. And that ratcheting effect, that is just a function of humans and the desire for learning and the desire for achievement.
Incredible. That was Mr. Quincy from FreeCodeCamp. Thank you so much.